If you've been cheated on or betrayed in any way in your relationship, do you leave or do you stay and work it out? That's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Secret Formula of Femininity for women who want to live a more feminine, fun, and fabulous life. I'm Dr. Nicole Montero, your host on this weekly journey to unlocking your inner radiance, nurturing fulfilling relationships, and becoming the best version of yourself. Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole, and your guide on this journey to tapping into your feminine essence. Today, we're going to dig into a pretty difficult conversation, and it's really about rebuilding trust after betrayal in your relationship. Whether you've personally been betrayed or you're supporting someone who's experienced betrayal, this is all about what it takes to rebuild trust and whether it's better to stay or decide to walk away. And what we're really going to find out is that this is a deeply personal decision, but I want to help you to think through some of the things that will help you to decide. Betrayal is really difficult because it can feel like it not only shatters your relationship, which is hard enough, but it really eats at the core of who you are. It can shatter your sense of self, and deciding whether to stay or go can be one of the hardest decisions that you'll ever make. So let's dig in. I want to share with you a client story, one of my coaching clients that was in one of my programs. And we didn't know this was going on. It was a group coaching program. I'll just call her Suzanne. And she faced betrayal in her marriage, and it was a complete surprise. She discovered her husband's infidelity, and she was, as you can imagine, devastated. She just found out by chance. After we talked a little bit, it sounds like she had some clues here and there, and that's a whole other issue, right? Like when you kind of have that feeling or you have clues, what do you do with that? But, for all purposes, she just when she found out the full story, she was completely taken aback and devastated. And she felt torn, as you would imagine, right? She loved him. They had been together for a while, but she wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again. He came and he was remorseful. They went through therapy. As far as she knows, he came clean and, told the truth, which actually any couples therapist will tell you that it's a delicate balance in terms of how much detail to share if a couple comes in for therapy or counseling related to infidelity. It's not just a fact that the person who was unfaithful should share every single detail, right? But he was forthcoming and they tried to work on rebuilding trust. But part of the work for this client was that she had to do a lot of work on herself. And you might say, well, she didn't do anything. Why did she have to work on herself? But it was really about rebuilding and rediscovering her sense of self worth because that was the real casualty of the betrayal. It wasn't so much, it was, the trust and the deception, but it really shattered her confidence and her sense of self worth. And she was comparing herself to this other woman and why did he choose her? And like all of these things that she started to internalize. So eventually, after some time of doing her own self work and then working on things in therapy, and they didn't have any kids, and she decided, you know what, the best decision for me is to leave. It's better for me to cut my losses. And it wasn't so much about him. It wasn't that he didn't do any work or wasn't willing to change. And quite frankly, I don't know if she found any smoking gun evidence that he was cheating again or betraying her again, but she felt like the relationship was no longer aligned with her values. And her journey taught me a lot. It taught me that healing after betrayal is very personal. There's no one size fits all. There's nobody that can be on the outside looking in and predict how it should go or what should happen. There's no exact formula. It also taught me that sometimes this is a traumatic experience in a person's relationship in life that makes them reevaluate things. So that can happen with trauma. There's something called post-traumatic growth where we take stock of who we are and what we want moving forward and how we want to shift after a traumatic event. And that's exactly what happened with her. She decided that, you know what, in some ways, I wasn't really my authentic self in this relationship. And she took a little bit of ownership for some of the dynamics in the relationship. Not that it was that his decision was her fault, but she recognized some things in the relationship and she decided that moving forward, she did not want to go forward, right? It wasn't aligning with her values. Now, other women make completely different choices. It may depend on things like so many other factors. And so I want to encourage any woman listening to this to know that it is a deeply personal issue. It's not about what is said on social media. It's not even about what your therapist would tell you to do. It really has to come from within and really knowing yourself and what you want for yourself moving forward that is going to help determine that. Okay. So the impact of betrayal, it hits so many different areas, but specifically trust. It comes in many forms, right? My example that I shared was about infidelity, and that's the one that we hear about a lot. But I read a great book called The State of Affairs, which was written by Esther Perel, great uh, couple marriage and family and couples therapist. And it is about infidelity, but she talks about how there's so many other areas of betrayal that we tend to look over because we're so focused on the salaciousness of infidelity. That's the one that catches our attention. It's in, when you watch a movie or a show or you hear gossip, that's the one that we hone in on. But there's things like other forms of dishonesty, secrets, broken promises, um, a lack of showing up, right? Saying that you're going to be there for a person, but really becoming emotionally and in other ways unavailable. And those types of betrayal can be a little bit harder to name or to grasp. Like sometimes, yes, we can talk about secrets and why did you keep this secret from me? But when it feels like someone isn't showing up or they're gradually and consistently pulling away, that can be like a betrayal, and it can be harder to name. And we call that something that's there's a term that we use that's called ambiguous loss. So it's a type of loss that's not as clear, like money or cheating or something concrete, but it's felt just as deeply. But it's a little bit harder because you don't quite know how to describe it, or you don't feel like you have the evidence to show everybody that this is what happened, right? So those are other forms of betrayal. Of course, abuse or allowing abuse of a child, of someone that you're close to, right? So things that really get at a person's values, and if it feels like they're behaving in a way that shows that their values are very much like the opposite of yours, that can be experienced as a deep betrayal. And it's some deep pain that comes with this, you guys, right? It can feel like you are losing your sense of who you are. You question things, you doubt yourself, you feel emotionally unstable in the relationship. And it can shake your confidence not only within the relationship as far as trusting the person, but as far as your confidence in your own judgment. You're feeling like, well, how did I miss this? Or how did I let this slide? Or can I really trust my intuition and my ability to judge, people and situations and what they do? So it can make you literally trust everything. I mean, excuse me, it can make you really question everything, which is a horrible feeling to have if you've ever had it. And this is why rebuilding trust, a lot of times we focus on the trust with your partner, but a big part of it is rebuilding trust with yourself. And this can be a challenge. You become hyper aware, hyper vigilant. You're wondering, like, what is the next clue that this person is cheating again or betraying me again? Or you start to question yourself in other decisions, big decisions that and small decisions that you have to make, to where you're like questioning all of that and wondering if you know what you're doing, if you're reading things right. And that could take a big emotional toll on you. So that's why one of the most important parts of this journey of rebuilding trust, most importantly with yourself, is learning how to better take care of yourself, right? You almost have to become your best friend, the best friend that you would be to your girlfriend or somebody else close to you that is going through a heartbreak and a betrayal. You have to also be that kind of friend to yourself. So, not criticizing yourself. I talk to so many women who, when someone that they were in relationship with makes a horrible decision to cheat, to betray them, to double cross them, that they blame themselves instead of recognizing it as that is a decision that that person decided to make, right? They start to really blame themselves and they're hard on themselves. And there's a difference between reflecting on the relationship dynamics and what, when I say relationship dynamics, I mean just what was going on. Are there ways that you were closing your eyes deliberately in denial? Were you not fully showing up as yourself? Were you not requiring the other person to fully show up as himself, as themselves? Then those are things that you can reflect back and look at, because those are things that you can learn for your next relationship. But that does not at all mean that it's about blaming yourself for a decision that somebody else makes, right? Because if a relationship is on rocky and shaky grounds, there's a lot of decisions that the people in the relationship could make. It doesn't automatically mean that they have to decide to be unfaithful or to lie or to betray in any other way, right? They could decide to communicate and share what they need or what they feel is lacking. They could decide to lean in and fully show up as themselves. They could decide to get professional help and counseling, right? So there are a lot of decisions when a relationship is on rocky ground, but a lot of people tend to take the easier route, which in some ways is not communicating and then acting outside of the relationship. Okay. So it's important, if you have experienced this and you're dealing with this breach of trust and this break of trust, that you have to be okay with separating the person's decision from your own self worth. And that is where a lot of the work is going to take place, right? So, there are some considerations though, like on a really practical level, whether you stay or whether you go, there's some things that you really want to consider, and some key things that you might even want to write down. And this is even if you're supporting someone who's been betrayed. One is the severity of the betrayal. Was this a one-time thing? Was the person under their own duress? Or was this a pattern of lying, of manipulation, of deception, behaviors that point more to the person having a lot of narcissistic traits? And you all have probably heard me with my get on my soapbox about how we don't want to over diagnose. We don't want to do these armchair diagnoses that just because the relationship fell apart, that doesn't mean that the person, your ex partner, was a narcissist, right? We tend to throw that term around a lot. But there are some key behaviors. If a person has a pattern of not considering your feelings, of being manipulative, of belittling you, trying to kind of gaslight you, and if they never take ownership or responsibility, that's different than if a person did something one time or it's not a pattern and they own up to it. Okay. So the severity of the betrayal really makes a difference, as well as the impact, right? Like, what kind of impact has this resulted in children outside the marriage? And that's not, or outside of the relationship. And that's not to say that it can't be salvaged, right? I can think of several examples. For one, high profile examples. So, for one, Dwayne Wade and Gabrielle Union, the actress and basketball player, they are now married. I think they've been married for, I don't know, 8, 9 years. They have a little girl, their own child. And he had kids already from a previous marriage, but during their relationship before they got married, he stepped out and he had a child with someone else outside of that relationship. Now, for a lot of people, that would be the cutoff. Like, no, I'm not dealing with it. For her, they and him, it wasn't. They worked it out. They ended up eventually getting married. There are a lot of examples, from quote back in the day where people had different little families. So they were clearly stepping out and the relationship continued. So again, it's a deeply personal decision as to what you would do with that. But you need to ask yourself, what level of severity of the betrayal can I still live with and be happy and be okay, right? The other thing, consideration, is the level of remorse. Is there a level of genuine remorse? Is your partner taking responsibility? Are they admitting? Are they acknowledging? Or are they making excuses, blaming you, not at all accepting responsibility for what they decided, right? It's just like, well, I wasn't happy and you weren't meeting my needs, right? It's all putting the blame outside on you. That is a whole different stance than really pausing and taking stock of why he decided to make this decision. Okay, so it's the real, genuine remorse, acknowledgement, and taking accountability. We hear a lot, right? We hear a lot where people are saying women need to take accountability. Well, all parties need to take accountability, especially the one who committed the act or acts of betrayal. Okay? The other thing is to consider is the commitment to change, right? Is this person willing to do the work to rebuild trust? Sometimes what happens is a person will acknowledge and say they're remorseful, but they want to cut off all conversation about it. They don't want you to mention it again because it makes them feel guilty, or they feel like if you have forgiven them, you all should move on, right? So that indicates there isn't a real willingness to do any kind of work to address the underlying issues that caused it in the first place. That's not a willingness, no willingness to do the work that is going to help you as the person who was betrayed, to feel safer, because that's really what gets cut off, is that sense of safety, or to help rebuild trust with you. Okay, so that commitment to change is a big factor. And then also your personal values, right? For some people, when they are married, their vows and what they commit to is through ups and downs, sickness and in health. We've heard it all, right? Through for richer or for poorer, and everything, like all the peaks and valleys of the relationship. And so for some people, that means that they are committed to the value of working on it no matter what. For other people, their values may say something different. That if there's a betrayal, that there's certain betrayals maybe that can still align with their values and them being in the relationship. And there's certain betrayals that are just like, you hurt a child, or you committed criminal activity, or you kept some kind of secret, right? So that's the part where you, as the person who experienced the betrayal, has to really think about you. What are your values? Are your values aligned with staying? Does it mean that you have to leave in order to be your authentic self? which decision, or maybe it's not black or white, right? Maybe it's I need a pause and a separation in order to evaluate where my values are right now. Because I think that's something we don't often take account for, which is how we all change over time. And what we felt our values were at one point were not our values at the point that we are right now. And so taking stock of that is really, really important. Okay. And then the other thing you really want to think about, though, is your own safety and well being. It's crazy. I was out for my walk actually earlier today, and I was walking past, it was a pretty busy street, and I started hearing this yelling and screaming. And I see this young woman um, banging on the window of a car that was parked. So she was by the driver's side, yelling, cursing, screaming. How could he do this? You better open this window. I'm gonna break this window. And she was in such a heightened state. And obviously she was emotionally like very triggered, but then she was standing in the street near the cars. She was threatening to break a window, which would put her at risk and even, legal troubles. And I thought to myself, like, I see this kind of thing too often, where we are in a state where when we get betrayed or hurt or whatever happens, we go so far extreme that we put ourselves at risk, right? So not only does the betrayal that happened potentially put us at risk, right? There's diseases, there's all kind of things. There's, if there's cheating, there's the scorned lover that comes and tries to harm, the main partner. Like there's all kind of ways that betrayals can put your partner at risk. But are you putting yourself at risk when you've been betrayed by letting this person take you so far out of your state of well being, right? So if you are so emotionally triggered, you got to pause and step back and get help, right? We should not be breaking property. We should not be putting ourselves in a position to be arrested, or God forbid you assault, you break somebody's window or hurt them. They're going to hit you back and fight back to you, and you're going to get hurt, right? So you have to look at your own safety and well being in terms of whether that person is putting you at risk physically or emotionally, or if your reaction to the situation is putting you at risk, right? And this is the part where the emotional intelligence comes in. And you have to judge how your emotional reaction could actually be escalating the situation. And you have to learn to regulate your emotions to where no one's saying you're not deeply hurt or saddened or angry or rageful if you've been betrayed, because all of those feelings could possibly come up. But the emotional intelligence part is how you deal with those feelings and regulating those feelings. And a lot of times when it comes to relationships, we have this image, you've heard the saying, all is fair in love and war. It's almost like love and betrayal from love is like being in a war. And so anything goes. And that's why we have this idea of like crimes of passion, and you do things in the heat of the moment because you part of your brain is not working because you're overcome with emotions. But that is not at all a healthy state to be in, and definitely not for long periods of time. So you don't want to be, that's when you get into these toxic relationships. And, sadly, social media is full of them now. Reality TV, even what's shown on movies. And I think it's skewing or it's warping the perspective of a lot of young women because they feel like showing that kind of over emotion and passion and toxic passion is a sign of love. And that's what makes the more stable expressions of love seem boring. But let me tell you, As you mature and as you get wiser, you understand that stable, healthy love, that is where it's at. Not these, toxic explosions of emotions where you or the other person are engaged in betrayal and then then you get all of the intense emotions and you're expressing those, and it's just this roller coaster of up and down. And what happens is neither party learns to really regulate their emotions because one person is stepping out or keeping secrets or whatever instead of truly communicating, and the other person is is reacting to that with all kinds of emotional outbursts and intense emotions that they can't control instead of learning to communicate in a healthy way, right? So your own safety and well-being, whether it's from the other person or self imposed from your reaction to the situation, that is a determining factor. And if there's a lot of emotional ups and downs, that is a sign to take a pause. That is a sign to get some like real individualized professional help. And it's a sign to ask yourself if being in the state that it is right now is more detrimental to your well being than anything else. All right. So these questions are like the severity of the betrayal, how genuine the person is in their remorse, how committed they are to change, your personal values, and your personal safety and well being. These are some of the key things that you want to examine that will help you determine what you want to do. Do you want to stay? Do you need to go? Do you need a pause or a break? And the good thing about any relationship is very rarely, unless you are like there's abuse and you are in danger, you don't always have to make a decision right here and now. You can pause. I talk a lot about the power of the pause. You can pause and do this self-reflection versus like being very reactive. I find that pausing is a part of regulating your emotions. You're giving yourself to just calm down and let the more logical, rational part of your brain have a chance to breathe and step up and help you make a decision versus just going purely off of strong emotions, right? So, if you decide to stay, there is also a process to rebuilding trust. And that's the thing that people don't get about relationships. Like, however it goes, whether to keep it, engaging and healthy and exciting takes work and effort and being intentional. And rebuilding trust after there's been a breach, that takes work and intentionality, like being intentional. So it's not just something of like, oh, it happened, you found out, you decide to stay, they apologize, and that's that. No, it's an entire process. So you might even if you're in this situation or you're supporting someone in this situation, it's good to write these down. The idea of like the acknowledgement and taking responsibility. That's the first step. So you really can't move forward if the other party doesn't take accountability and responsibility. They must own up to their actions without blaming anyone else, right? And that's something that a lot of people just never learn. I talk about that a lot with my kids, where if they were supposed to do something and they didn't, and I ask about it, and it's like, well, it's because blah, blah, blah. And I'm saying, no, let's first start with your part. Take accountability. Did you do what you were supposed to do? Okay. That first needs to be established before we can get into any excuses. And I really don't like excuses. I like explanations that give context, but there's still, when you start giving excuses, you're not taking responsibility and accountability. Okay. The second thing is open and honest communication. That's usually how these things, like one part of betrayal is the lying part, the keeping from the other person. And so that's where open and honest communication is lacking. And that's often a skill that a lot of us just don't have, right? We've been taught that it's better to avoid conflict or confrontation, or we wait and we let it build up until it just explodes. So it's you're on these two extremes of the spectrum. So it's a skill that has to be relearned. And guess what, right? You often need help with that. But both people need to be open about their feelings, their fears, and their boundaries. So that means that you, as the person who was betrayed, you need to know that goes back to what are your values? What does your authentic self need? What are your boundaries? And also expressing your fears. I know that this is often a place where you, as the woman who have may have been betrayed, you feel like I don't want to, show my hand. I don't want to, but you can't like keep up a wall. If you're deciding to stay, yes, you need boundaries, and sometimes it might take you a while to truly trust again, but you do have to practice learning to communicate and being honest, right? Because if it still bothers you, there's no point in lying and saying, oh, I'm fine, I don't care. That is not the truth, right? So there's that balance between having healthier boundaries, because a lot of times these things happen. Part of it is there weren't healthy boundaries within the relationship, but it's also learning to be honest. And that is going back to, that relates to another important step, which is transparency. And that can help. What can help with that is having a routine for communication. So, you know how you might hear people talk about let's have a family meeting, or let's have our evening talk or a weekly talk, right? So this is where you don't have to do the guessing. Like, there's a specific time where, hey, we're going to put everything on the table, or hey, each person is going to write down three main points that are important for them for this week, and we're going to discuss it, right? So having that routine and having a process for bringing things up and putting them on the table can be like an important way to make the communication better. The other thing is, when you decide to try to rebuild trust, it takes time and patience. Whatever happened and whatever led to the thing that happened, the betrayal, it didn't happen overnight. Usually it doesn't happen overnight, especially if this is a relationship you're deciding to stay in. This isn't something that just happened overnight. So it's going to take time and patience. It's a process. It's like the give and take and the missteps that might happen with communication. It could be really being more transparent with your feelings. It could be holding each other accountable, holding your partner who betrayed you accountable, but they also get the right to hold you accountable for if they feel like you're not fully being honest with your feelings, right? Because what happens is sometimes we, especially as women, we hold our feelings in, but it comes out in our behaviors, and we're passive aggressive, and the resentment kind of shows on our face, but we're not being truly honest with what we're feeling. Okay. And finally, don't be, most of the time, it's hard to do this process on your own as a couple. You're navigating your own feelings and your desire to be back together. And so, professional help, get help, go to counseling, go to therapy, get couples counseling, work on yourselves individually, get a coach. A lot of times, the women that I coach, they need specific coaching around communication, rebuilding their sense of self worth, and not internalizing what what the partner who betrayed them decided to do. And that is so much easier said than done, to be able to not take on somebody else's decision, right? I was watching something I was watching, and this woman was separating. She wanted a divorce from her husband. And she said she found out he was cheating. And she was really upset that, in her words, the woman he cheated with was so much beneath her. She said this woman was ugly. That these are her words. She didn't even she's a bum. She doesn't look anything like me. Like she had this whole assessment of this other woman, which she could not understand why he chose to do that. And he said, because it was an interview with both of them, and he said, I know she's not you. She doesn't hold a candle to you. It was just something easy and convenient to do, right? So that was a whole other thing, right? Their dynamic had a lot of unhealthy dynamics to it, but part of her betrayal was feeling like, why would you choose lesser than me, right? It's almost as if she was saying, if you had leveled up, so to speak, by, you always have this idea that someone steps out on the relationship because they have a desire for something that you're not, that's something that you're lacking, and they're looking for better. But that is not always how it happens. Sometimes infidelity could be due to low self esteem on the person's part, lack of communication skills, inability to really do the work on themselves to show up differently in the relationship. It could be that this was modeled for them. It could simply be that it's convenience and they decided that they're just going to give into any kind of impulse or urge that they have, right? But those things, you have to understand that if you were betrayed, you as the woman, those are not your problems. So whether you feel she looks better than you or worse than you, whether you think she's a level up from you or a level down, that is not your problem or your issue. Okay, so learning not to internalize, that's one of my favorite words, right? Not internalize or take responsibility or let your self worth be affected by somebody else's decision and how they decided to behave. Okay, so it's the time, it's the acknowledgement, it's being transparent, having routines around communication, and getting not, don't be afraid to get professional help. Now, those are things that you have to consider when rebuilding trust to when you decide to stay. But sometimes, like, what happens when you feel like leaving is the best option? And sometimes for you, that will be the healthiest choice. As I said earlier, it could be the choice that aligns better with your values, your authentic self, your health and well being. And especially if the betrayal is part of a repeated pattern and the person is not taking accountability, they keep compromising your safety and your mental health and well being, it truly is time to learn how to prioritize yourself. Because what that behavior says, although the behavior is not your responsibility, your response of not having boundaries is your responsibility. And so, whatever you decide, it's not a failure on your part, right? When you start holding yourself to these standards of like what you expect other people think you should do, then that's when you start getting to, I'm a failure. I totally, mess this up. But you have to understand that leaving doesn't mean that you have failed. It means that you've chosen through self reflection, self awareness, doing your own inner work to honor the best way to honor your own worth. Okay. So either way, and the key thing is, like I said earlier, this is a very personal decision. So you have to learn how to get support from the right people and tune out the voices that are not helpful, because you're going to hear a lot of, this is where you get the most input, especially us ladies, right? Everybody's ready to come in with their perspective, which is one of the main reasons it's important to get professional help, therapy, coaching, some other coaching community. We talk a lot about these things in my Boundaries to Bliss inner circle. Supporting each other, not with you should do this or you shouldn't do that, but being a safe place to listen, to empathize, and to help the person to decide on their own. I have very rarely told a woman, you should do this. I will ask questions that help them to make the best decision, but it really has to be a decision that comes from that person. Okay. And then I also want to speak on forgiveness. We know we hear that word a lot, but it is a big factor whether you decide to stay or go. Forgiveness is going to be a part of your journey of moving on. It, of course, does not mean you're excusing their behavior, right? It just means that you're freeing yourself up. Forgiveness is really, that is the one thing or one of the things you have control over, to free yourself up from the anger and the resentment, in the sense that like you're so obsessed with getting that person back or that person behaving in a different way, and you can't control that. So learning that forgiveness, whether you stay or whether you go, forgiveness is going to be an important part of your healing and growing journey. And it's not for them, it's really for you, right? So, some things that you can do to help you to factor in these things that will help you decide. Journaling, of course. When I said you have to be your own best friend, that's the self care that you would tell your friend to do, right? You might say, girl, let's go to a spa, or take some time out and watch one of your favorite shows. Go for a walk, have that nice cup of tea. Give your, immerse yourself in something, do some cooking, do some creative activity. Like I remember I started making my own beaded jewelry and doing henna and all of these things when I was stressed out in graduate school, right? And so that wasn't necessarily a betrayal, but like I was completely overwhelmed and I needed an outlet outside of what I was doing. So a lot of times you will need an outlet outside of the relationship, the stress, and trying to figure out what to do. Setting clear boundaries. So, whether again you decide to stay or go, the first boundary is an emotional boundary where you learn to not, that's the emotional regulation part, not being so reactive to other people's emotions. And if you have strong emotions, sometimes you need to walk it out. Remember that song? Walk it out. Sometimes you need to walk it out. You need to write it out. You need to exercise or move it out. You need to rest it out, but you don't need to be reactive all the time. And that's a boundary that you need to honor yourself. Okay. And a support system. So, again, friends, helpful friends, not the ones that are overly opinionated. There are friends that can help you from their own experience or the experience of people they know, or they could just, it's not that they can't have an opinion, but when it's overly like a strong opinion that's trying to sway you one way or the other, that can get in the way of you thinking through what you need for yourself. All right. So I have a couple of questions about this that I want to answer. First, I want to make sure if you're watching, you see I have on the Damsel Me Please shirt. This is the shirt from my line, which is going to go with the journal, the Damsel Me Please journal. And it's all about how to help you lean back and fall back as a woman so that you can rest in your feminine. So it's a play on the whole damsel in distress. And for all of my overly independent women, yes, sometimes you need to learn to get damseled. So, damsel me, please. If you're listening, you'll see the link for these shirts in the show notes. But yeah, they're really awesome. Okay, so the first question is, how can I tell if my partner is genuinely sorry or just trying to avoid consequences? Yes. The key thing is actions over words. Look for consistent actions, not words, not one big gesture like a love bombing gesture. We all remember, like, we can look to celebrity examples where, you know, one of the partners or the spouse was unfaithful, and they come out in public with all these flowers and public apologies and all of this stuff that makes it look like they're remorseful, but those are really just words because they go right back to the same thing, or they're not making those consistent actions that show that they're really trying to change. Okay. And so you want to just make sure that they're doing the steps to rebuild trust. They're willing to communicate, they're willing to be patient with you, and that they're not just looking for a quick fix. So they have to show patience. I know I talked about you as the person who was betrayed having to be patient with the process, but they need to show patience because you're going to have a lot of different emotions. So if they just want a quick fix and they want to move on, I would say they're probably being sorry just to avoid the consequences. Okay. The other question is, what if I want to leave, but I still love them? That is a great question, actually. I think that's one that most women who've been betrayed can relate to. And know that you can still, they're not mutually exclusive. You can still really love someone and decide to leave because it's you just make that decision based on all the things that I just went through, right? So love alone is not always enough. I will say that, right? Now, do I think we should always make hasty decisions? I think a lot of people leave relationships prematurely, not necessarily due to betrayal, but due to them self abandoning in the relationship and feeling unhappy. And I think those kinds of situations, there can be some work that can help you reclaim yourself and reconnect to the relationship. But when it comes to betrayal, if you decide through your own reflection that you do not want to stay in this relationship, it's okay. That's an acknowledgement that you can love someone and still decide that this you do not want to move forward with it. Okay. So, two things can be true at once. And that's just life. Sometimes we can love someone and not be with them. And there's some people who will say, like, they feel like they have actually built a friendship with that person after all is said and done. They've left, everybody's moved on, and then they can reconnect as friends. And sometimes people feel like that's even more fulfilling than being in this relationship where they were so caught up and they could never communicate or trust or get it right with that person. All right. I love those questions. Remember, you can always send me a question on my Instagram or on my email. Everything is in the show notes. So keep your questions coming. So I want to thank you for just, continuing to support the show. Don't forget, I have my book, The Boundaries to Bliss Blueprint, for women who are finally ready to win at love. And it touches on all of these issues. You can get um, you can purchase it, the ebook and the show notes link. The t-shirt, yes, the Damsel Me Please t-shirt, that's new. I haven't been talking to you all about that on the podcast, but I'm putting the link to that. I before I started recording, I had this on and my husband was like, "Oh, I like that shirt." So I was like, "Yes, this is my shirt. Damsel Me Please," okay? And of course, if you want to learn more about my inner circle community, where we support each other, where you get live coaching from me, where you get all the resources to tap into your femininity, have healthy boundaries, and really uh, raise your relationship IQ, then you can check out the Boundaries to Bliss Society Inner Circle. Again, all the links are in the show notes, and I cannot wait to see you on the next episode. Remember, you deserve to feel your authentic self, to have trust in your relationship, and to really feel like you're healthy and you're loved and you're honored. So I will see you in the next episode. This is Dr. Nicole.